In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a screen pierces the night, and a man lies dead, a silver letter opener in his heart. Who among the guests, each hiding secrets of blackmail, betrayal, and forbidden pasts, wielded the fatal blow? As Hercule Poirot's little gray cells unravel a web of lies, from a stopped clock to a mysterious blue silk thread, one question haunts: will the truth destroy them all? Dive into this classic Agatha Christie mystery where every clue counts and the final twist will leave you breathless. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over the rolling hills of Dorset, where the imposing silhouette of Blackthorn Manor loomed against the horizon. Captain Arthur Hastings, retired from His Majesty's army and now an occasional companion to the renowned detective Hercule Poirot, gazed out of the train window with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The invitation to spend a weekend at the estate of Sir Reginald Thorne, a wealthy industrialist, had arrived unexpectedly at their shared London flat, addressed not to Poirot, but to Hastings himself. It was a curious detail, one that Poirot had noted with a twitch of his meticulously groomed mustache. "Mon ami," Poirot had said, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of intrigue. "An invitation to a grand English manor, sent to you and not to Poirot? It is, how you say, most irregular. We must accept, for where there is irregularity, there is often a mystery." And so, they had boarded the train to Dorset, Poirot's neatly pressed suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the more casual attire of his friend. Hastings, ever the Englishman, felt a certain comfort in the prospect of a weekend in the countryside, though the cryptic nature of the invitation gnawed at him. Sir Reginald, a distant acquaintance from his army days, had written only of a gathering of old friends and new faces, to celebrate the completion of his newly renovated manor. Yet there was something in the phrasing, a hint of urgency perhaps, that suggested more than a mere social occasion. The train pulled into the small station at Thorne. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and the distant tang of the sea. They were ushered into the grand hall, where a chandelier cast flickering light across polished oak panels. Sir Reginald Thorne, a robust man in his late 50s with a ruddy complexion and a booming voice, greeted them with enthusiasm. "Hastings, my dear fellow!" he exclaimed, clasping Hastings' hand. "And this must be the famous Monsieur Poirot. A pleasure, sir, a pleasure. I've heard tales of your brilliance." Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of polite modesty. "Monsieur Thorne, you are too kind. I am but a humble seeker of truth, here to enjoy your hospitality." Sir Reginald's laugh echoed through the hall. "Humble, eh? We'll see about that. Come, meet the others." The drawing-room was a scene of restrained elegance, its occupants a curious mix of personalities. Lady Margaret Thorne, Sir Reginald's wife, was a striking woman in her 40s, her auburn hair swept up in a style that spoke of wealth and refinement. Her smile was warm, but her eyes held a flicker of unease as she greeted the newcomers. Beside her stood their daughter Clara, a vivacious young woman of 22, whose laughter filled the room, but seemed to mask a certain restlessness. Dr. Lionel Everett, a physician and old friend of Sir Reginald, was a lean man with sharp features and a habit of adjusting his spectacles when nervous, a trait Hastings noticed almost immediately. Next was Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a widowed cousin of Lady Margaret, whose quiet demeanor and downcast eyes suggested a life marked by sorrow. Then there was Mr. Victor Hammond, a brash young stockbroker with a penchant for flashy cufflinks and an overly familiar manner, particularly toward Clara. Finally, Miss Evelyn Grey, Sir Reginald's private secretary, was a woman of indeterminate age,
her prim attire and clipped speech betraying a mind as sharp as her employer's. As the group exchanged pleasantries, Hastings observed the undercurrents of tension. Clara's laughter faltered when her father mentioned a recent business venture, and Mrs. Langley's hand tightened around her glass when Victor
At one point, his voice soft but penetrating. "These manuscripts, they are well protected, Such treasures, they attract the attention of those who are not always honest." Sir Reginald chuckled. "Oh, they're safe enough. Locked in a steel safe in the library, with a combination known only to me and Miss Grey here." Miss Grey nodded, her expression unreadable. "Quite secure, Monsieur Poirot." As the evening wore on, Hastings felt the weight of the atmosphere grow heavier. The clocks in the manor struck 10, and the conversation turned to plans for the weekend. A garden party, a walk to the cliffs, a tour of the library. Yet beneath the polite chatter, there was a sense of something unspoken, something waiting to unravel. It was just past 11 when the first hint of trouble emerged. The party had retired to the drawing room for coffee when a piercing scream cut through the air. It came from the direction of the library, and as the guests froze, Sir Reginald leapt to his feet, his face pale. "That's Clara!" he shouted, bolting from the room. Hastings and Poirot followed, the others trailing behind. They reached the library to find Clara standing by the open safe, her hands trembling, her face ashen. The safe door hung ajar, its contents, Sir Reginald's precious manuscripts, gone, and on the floor beside a spilled glass of brandy lay a single, unmistakable clue, a gold cufflink, engraved with the initials V.H. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene, his fingers brushing the cufflink delicately. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The game, it has begun." Hastings felt a chill run down his spine. The weekend at Blackthorn Manor, it seemed, was to be no ordinary affair. The Crimson Stain. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor, bathed in the flickering glow of the fire, seemed to hold its breath as the evening wore on. The clink of crystal glasses and the low murmur of conversation masked a tension that Captain Arthur Hastings could not quite place, though his instincts, honed by years at Hercule Poirot's side, told him something was amiss. The guests, an eclectic assembly of family and acquaintances, maintained it fraying at the edges. Julian Marwood, the nephew, trailed behind, his cigarette discarded in his haste, his face pale but curious. The library door stood ajar, and as Hastings pushed it open, the scent of old leather and dust was overwhelmed by something metallic and unmistakable. Blood. In the center of the room, sprawled across a Persian rug, lay Dr. Leonard Carver, a guest whose sharp wit and sharper tongue had made him a polarizing figure at dinner. His spectacles lay askew on the floor, one lens cracked, and a crimson stain spread across his white shirt front, seeping into the intricate patterns of the rug. A letter opener, its silver handle gleaming, protruded from his chest. "Good Lord," Hastings muttered, kneeling beside the body. He pressed 2 fingers to Carver's neck, though the stillness of the man's form told him all he needed to know. "He's dead." Julian Marwood, lingering in the doorway, let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a turn-up. The old boy's been done in Grayson." The butler stood rigid, his hands clasped tightly before him. "I must fetch Lady Marwood," he said, his voice trembling slightly, though whether from fear or something else, Hastings could not tell. "No," Hastings said firmly. "No one leaves this room until we've secured it. Grayson, lock the door. Julian, help me check the windows." The young man raised an eyebrow but complied, moving to the tall, leaded windows that overlooked the manor's darkened gardens. "Locked tight," he reported, his tone almost flippant. "No one's climbed out this way, unless they're a ghost." Hastings ignored the quip, his mind racing. The library was a closed space, its only entrances the door through which they had entered, and a small servant's passage, which Grayson confirmed was bolted from the inside. The room itself was a labyrinth of bookshelves, with a heavy oak desk, a globe, and a scattering of armchairs. A half-empty glass of brandy sat on a side table, its amber contents catching the light of a single lamp. Beside it lay a crumpled piece of paper, its edges singed as if someone had held it too close to a flame. Before Hastings could examine it further, a commotion at the door announced the arrival of the other guests, their voices a chorus of shock and indignation. His mustache waxed to perfection. His green eyes, sharp as a cat's, surveyed the scene with an almost clinical detachment. "Mon ami Hastings," he said, inclining his head, "you have, as always, stumbled into the heart of a mystery." "Poirot!" Hastings exclaimed, relief flooding him. "You're here earlier than expected." "The train, it was most cooperative," Poirot replied, his gaze already roving over the room. He stepped carefully around the body, his polished shoes avoiding the spreading stain. "And what do we have here? A tragedy, yes, but one with a story to tell. Tell me, Hastings, what have you observed?" Hastings recounted the events, the scream, the discovery of Dr. Carver, the locked windows, the bolted servant's passage. He pointed to the letter opener, the brandy glass, and the singed paper. Poirot listened, his head tilted slightly, his fingers steepled before him. When Hastings finished, Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very good, mon ami, but you have missed one thing." He bent down, his movements precise, and plucked a small object from the rug near Carver's hand, a pearl button, its surface faintly scratched. Curious, is it not? A button, torn perhaps in a struggle, yet no one here appears to have a garment in disarray. The guests, now crowded at the library's threshold, exchanged uneasy glances. Lady Evelyn clutched her shawl. Julian lit another cigarette with shaking hands, and Clara Vance stared at the button, as if it were a serpent. Among them were others, Mr. Reginald Holt, a solicitor with a dour face and a habit of clearing his throat, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a widowed cousin of Sir Henry's, her lips pursed in disapproval, and Mr. Victor Drayton, a business associate of the late Sir Henry, whose flushed cheeks suggested a fondness for the brandy now abandoned on the table. Poirot turned to the group, his voice calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, a crime has been committed, and none shall leave this manor until Hercule Poirot has uncovered the truth. Grayson, you will ensure no one enters or exits this room until the police are summoned." Hastings.
Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile.
"I make, Hastings, that this is no simple crime of passion. There is method here, and motive, deeply buried, but not beyond the reach of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells." As the wind howled outside, rattling the library's windows, Hastings knew that the night was only the beginning of a puzzle that would test even Poirot's formidable intellect. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Poirot. Chapter 3. The library of Blackthorn Manor, now a silent witness to Dr. Leonard Carver's untimely demise, stood frozen in time as Hercule Poirot took command of the scene. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and old books, and the flickering lamplight cast eerie shadows across the shelves. Captain Arthur Hastings, his notebook in hand, watched as Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his small, neat figure a stark contrast to the chaos of the crime. Poirot had dismissed the other guests to the drawing room, insisting that the library remain undisturbed until the local constabulary could be summoned. The nearest village, Thornby, was a good 10 miles away, and with the telephone lines down, cut, Poirot suspected, though he did not yet voice this theory, the manor was effectively isolated. Grayson, the butler, had been dispatched to send a footman to fetch the police, but it would be hours before they arrived. In the meantime, Poirot declared, the investigation would begin. "Hastings, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate. "You will observe that a crime scene is like a canvas, painted with the intentions of the guilty. Every stroke, every detail tells us something of the artist. Let us begin with the body." He knelt beside Dr. Carver, his gloved hands hovering over the corpse without touching it. The letter opener, its silver handle engraved with the Marwood crest, was embedded deeply in Carver's chest, suggesting a blow delivered with considerable force. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he examined the angle of the wound. "Curious," he murmured. "The thrust is upward, as if the attacker were shorter than the victim, or perhaps standing below him on the floor, while he stood on a step or chair." "Sedative, or worse." He set it down carefully. "We shall have this analyzed. And the letter?" He unfolded the singed paper again, reading the fragment aloud. "Repay the debt, or the truth will out. A threat, Hastings. But to whom? And by whom?" Before Hastings could respond, a soft knock at the library door interrupted them. Grayson entered, his face pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot, the guests are growing restless. Lady Marwood requests your presence in the drawing room. She wishes to know what is to be done." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as mild amusement. "What is to be done?" "Why, the truth is to be uncovered, naturellement. Tell Lady Marwood that Hercule Poirot will join her shortly. But first I must speak with each guest privately. Arrange a small room, perhaps the study, and send them to me one by one." Grayson nodded and withdrew, leaving Poirot to survey the room once more. "Hastings, you will remain with me. Your observations, though sometimes enthusiastic, are valuable. Now let us consider the cast of this little drama." He ticked off the suspects on his fingers, his voice precise. "Lady Evelyn Marwood, the widow, who invited us here for reasons yet unclear. Julian Marwood, her nephew, a young man with the air of one who spends money he does not earn. Miss Clara Vance, the companion, nervous, and perhaps hiding more than her youth suggests. Mr. Reginald Holt, the solicitor, whose dour manner conceals, I suspect, a keen interest in the Marwood fortune. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, the cousin, whose disapproval of Dr. Carver was evident at dinner. And Mr. Victor Drayton, the business associate, whose flushed face speaks of indulgence and perhaps desperation." Hastings frowned. "You think they all had reason to want Carver dead?" "Reason, Hastings? Oh, oui. Motive is never in short supply when wealth and secrets are at play. But we must discover the means and the opportunity. Come, let us begin the interviews. The study, a smaller room adjacent to the library, was furnished with a mahogany desk and a single armchair. "Anyone object to his presence?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. She glanced away toward the fire. He was not universally liked. His manner could be abrasive. Julian, my nephew, found him insufferable, and Mrs. Langley, well, she and Dr. Carver had a history, though I know little of it. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And this evening, where were you between 9 and 10 o'clock when the scream was heard?" "I was in the drawing room with Clara and Mr. Holt," she replied quickly. "We were discussing the weather, of all things." So dreadfully mundane in hindsight. "Thank you, madame. That will be all for now." As Lady Evelyn left, Julian Marwood sauntered in, his nonchalance a stark contrast to his aunt's restraint. "Well, Poirot," he said, lighting a cigarette, "you've got your work cut out. Carver was a rotter, if you ask me, always poking his nose where it wasn't wanted." "And where, pray, was your nose this evening?" Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. Julian grinned, exhaling a plume of smoke. "In the billiard room with Drayton. We were having a game. Rather a heated one, too. He's a sore loser." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you heard nothing? No scream? No thud?" "Not a thing," Julian said too quickly. "Billiard room's at the other end of the house. Thick walls, you know." The interviews continued, each guest offering their alibi, their story punctuated by nervous glances or guarded silences. Clara Vance claimed to have been in the drawing room, fetching Lady Evelyn's shawl. Reginald Holt corroborated her story but admitted to stepping out briefly to retrieve a cigar from his room. Mrs. Langley had been in her bedroom writing letters, while Victor Drayton confirmed Julian's account of their billiard game, though his hands trembled as he spoke. When the last guest had left, Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "What do you make of it, Hastings?" "They all have alibis," Hastings said, frowning, "but they're so convenient, and no one admits to hearing anything unusual." Convenient. The breakfast room, with the cautious tread of those who know they are watched. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at the far end of the table, observed the strained politeness with a growing sense of unease. The clink of porcelain and the murmur of forced pleasantries could not mask the undercurrent of fear that rippled through the group. Hercule Poirot, however, appeared as serene as ever, his breakfast of a single boiled egg and a cup of tisane consumed with meticulous care. His moustache, perfectly symmetrical, gleamed in the dim light filtering through the tall windows. He had spent the early hours in the library, examining the scene with a magnifying glass, and now sat with his notebook open, his pencil poised like a conductor's baton. Hastings knew that look. Poirot was orchestrating the investigation, and every word spoken, every glance exchanged, was a note in his symphony. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the muted conversation, "I regret to disturb your meal, but the matter of Dr. Carver's death requires our attention. I have questions, and I trust you will answer with the utmost candor." The guests stiffened, their forks pausing mid-air. Lady Evelyn Marwood, at the head of the table, set down her teacup with a faint clink. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but her eyes wary. "We all wish to see this dreadful matter resolved." "Bon," Poirot said, his green eyes sweeping the room. "Let us begin with the timeline. The scream was heard at precisely 10 o'clock last night. Dr. Carver was found moments later, dead, with a letter opener in his chest. Each of you has provided an alibi, but alibis, they are like mirrors. They reflect what we wish to see, not always what is true." Julian Marwood, slouched in his chair, smirked. "You're saying we're all liars, Poirot?" "Not all, monsieur," Poirot replied smoothly. "But one among you is not what they seem. Let us review. Lady Marwood, you were in the drawing room with Miss Vance and Mr. Holt. Mr. Holt, you stepped out briefly to retrieve a cigar. Alone. Mrs. Langley. A heavy silence fell. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her lips pursed as tightly as ever, spoke first. "Dr. Carver was a man of expensive tastes," she said, her voice clipped. "He borrowed heavily from my late cousin Sir Henry years ago. I believe the debt was never repaid." Lady Evelyn's face tightened. "That is old history, Beatrice. Henry never spoke of it." "Perhaps he should have," Mrs. Langley retorted. "Carver was no gentleman. He had a way of collecting secrets, using them to his advantage." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Secrets, madame? And what secrets did Dr. Carver hold over you?" Mrs. Langley flushed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "None. I merely heard rumors. He was not to be trusted." "Interesting," Poirot murmured, making a note. "And you, Monsieur Drayton, you were Sir Henry's business associate. Did Dr. Carver hold secrets over you?" Drayton's florid face grew redder. "I barely knew the man," he blustered. "We met a few times in London, that's all. Business matters, nothing personal." Poirot's smile was faint, but knowing. "And yet, you were seen arguing with him in the garden yesterday afternoon. A witness, Grayson the butler, overheard raised voices. Something about a failed venture. Care to elaborate?" Drayton's hand shook as he reached for his coffee. "It was nothing, a disagreement over investments. Carver had unrealistic expectations." "Unrealistic," Poirot echoed, his tone deceptively mild. "Or perhaps inconvenient." Before Drayton could respond, Clara Vance let out a small sob, her hands covering her face. "Oh, please stop," she cried. "This is too awful. Dr. Carver was cruel, yes, but no one here would kill him." "Clara, compose yourself," Lady Evelyn said sharply, though her own hands trembled. "Monsieur Poirot is only doing what must be done." Poirot's gaze softened as he regarded the young woman. "Mademoiselle Vance, you seem distressed. Did Dr. Carver cause you pain?" Clara's eyes darted to Lady Evelyn, then to the floor. He said things, unkind things, about my past."
And Holt in the drawing-room at 9:45. Holt absent from 9:50 to 9:55. Mrs. Langley in her room from 9:30 onward. Julian and Drayton in the billiard room from 9 to 10 o'clock. The scream at 10 o'clock placed the murder within a narrow window, but the locked room puzzled him. How had the killer entered and left undetected? Poirot rose, signaling the end of the breakfast interrogation. "I thank you for your cooperation," he said. "I will now return to the library to continue my examination. Captain Hastings, you will accompany me. The rest of you remain in the manor. Do not attempt to leave." As the guests dispersed, their whispers trailing like ghosts, Hastings followed Poirot back to the library. The body had been covered with a sheet, pending the police's arrival, but the room remained untouched. Poirot moved to the desk, his fingers tracing the edge of the brandy glass. "Hastings," he said, "observe the glass. There is a faint smudge on the rim, a fingerprint perhaps, but not Dr. Carver's. His hands were clean." Hastings leaned closer, squinting. "Could it be the killer's?" "Perhaps," Poirot said. "Or perhaps someone who shared a drink with him before the fatal blow. We must also consider the servants' passage. Grayson insists it was bolted, but bolts can be tampered with." He crossed to the narrow door, hidden behind a tapestry, and examined the bolt. "See here, Hastings, a scratch on the metal, fresh. Someone may have forced it open and then rebolted it to create the illusion of a locked room." Hastings' eyes widened. "So the killer could have escaped that way?" But we must confirm the timing. The scream suggests Dr. Carver was alive until 10 o'clock. The killer had mere minutes to act and vanish." Poirot's gaze returned to the pearl button, still resting on his handkerchief. "And this button, it does not match any garment I have seen thus far. We must search the guests' rooms." As they left the library, the sound of a distant car engine signaled the police's arrival. Poirot's expression hardened. "The constabulary will blunder, Hastings, as they often do. We must work quickly to preserve—"
"Eh?" Hargreaves said, his voice booming. "Nasty business. Looks straightforward, though. That letter opener's got the Marwood crest on it. Family heirloom, I'd wager. Points to someone in the house, likely with a grudge." He turned to Poirot, his tone skeptical. "You're that foreign detective, aren't you? Poirot, is it? Well, we've got this under control. No need for amateurs mucking about." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sure sign of suppressed indignation. "Amateur, Inspector? No. Hercule Poirot is a professional of the mind. And this crime, it is not so straightforward as you suppose. But please proceed." I shall observe Hastings, standing by the window with his notebook. Stifled a grin. He knew Poirot's deference was a ruse, a way to let Hargreaves blunder while he gathered more pieces of the puzzle. The inspector, oblivious, began questioning the guests, who had been summoned back to the drawing room. Hastings followed Poirot, who lingered just outside the library, his attention fixed on the servants' passage. "Hastings," Poirot murmured, "while the good inspector chases his red herrings, we shall pursue the truth. This passage, its bolt is indeed tampered with. See the scratches, fresh and deliberate. Someone wished to create the illusion of a locked room, but they were not as clever as they thought." Before Hastings could reply, Inspector Hargreaves' voice echoed from the drawing room, loud and accusatory. "Mr. Marwood, you were heard arguing with Dr. Carver last night, and this letter opener belongs to your family. Care to explain?" Julian Marwood's drawl carried a hint of defiance. "Argue? Sure. I didn't like the man. He was a sanctimonious prig, always poking into my affairs. But I didn't kill him. I was in the billiard room with Drayton when it happened." "Drayton, eh?" Hargreaves said, turning to Victor Drayton, who was mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "You confirm this?" Yes, Drayton stammered. "We were playing billiards. Didn't hear a thing until the scream." Hargreaves grunted, clearly unconvinced, and whose sharp tongue and evident dislike for Dr. Carver made her an easy target for suspicion. "Madame Langley," Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk, "you spoke of Dr. Carver's debts to Sir Henry. Were there other indiscretions you knew of?" Mrs. Langley's eyes flashed with indignation. "I've said all I intend to. Carver was a leech, always sniffing out secrets to use against people. If you ask me, he got what he deserved." Her words drew gasps from Clara Vance, and a sharp look from Lady Evelyn. Poirot, however, merely nodded. "And where were you, madame, at 10 o'clock last night?" "In my room, as I told you," she snapped, "writing letters to my solicitor. I had no reason to be in the library." "Yet you were seen near the East Wing at 9:30, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "Grayson mentioned you passing the corridor, carrying a shawl." Mrs. Langley's face reddened. "I was cold. I fetched a shawl from my room. Is that a crime?" "Not at all," Poirot said, making a note. "But accuracy, it is essential." Hastings, watching closely, noticed Clara Vance's hands trembling as she clutched her teacup. Poirot's gaze followed his, and he turned to the young woman. "Mademoiselle Vance, you were in the drawing-room with Lady Marwood and Mr. Holt, oui? Yet you left briefly to fetch a shawl. At what time?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Just before 10, I think. I wasn't gone long." "And did you pass the library?" Poirot pressed. "No," Clara said too quickly. "I mean, I went straight to my room and back." Poirot's eyes lingered on her, but he moved on to Reginald Holt, the solicitor, whose dour expression had not softened since the previous night. "Monsieur Holt, you left the drawing-room to fetch a cigar. Did you see anyone near the library?" Holt cleared his throat, a habit that grated on Hastings' nerves. "No one. The corridor was empty. I was gone only a few minutes." "Yet the cigar case in your room is on the suggested unease. Poirot, observing silently, made another note, his pencil moving with deliberate precision. When the interviews concluded, Hargreaves announced his intention to search the guests' rooms for the missing pearl button. Poirot, however, requested a private word with Hastings in the study. "Mon ami," he said, closing the door. "The inspector, he chases the obvious, but the obvious is a trap. Julian Marwood is too convenient a culprit. The true killer is cleverer, hiding behind these alibis. Hastings frowned. But the letter opener, the argument, Julian fits. Fits, but too neatly, Poirot said. Consider the singed letter. It was burned deliberately, yet not destroyed. Why? To ensure we found it. And the brandy glass, its smudge, suggests someone else was with Carver, perhaps moments before his death. We must look beyond the red herrings to the subtler clues. Hastings glanced at his notes. The alibis a tangle of times and places. What about Clara? She's nervous, and her story about the shawl doesn't quite add up. Précisément, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. Mademoiselle Vance knows more than she says, but so do they all. We must apply pressure, Hastings, and watch who cracks. As they returned to the drawing room, the guests' uneasy glances followed them. The manor's walls seemed to close in, each shadow hiding a secret, each silence a clue. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, and Hastings knew the net was tightening around the killer, even if the truth remained just out of reach. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The late morning light filtered through the mullioned windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting a lattice of shadows across the drawing room where the guests sat in uneasy silence. The arrival of Inspector Hargreaves and his constables had done little to dispel the tension. If anything, their heavy-handed questions had only deepened the atmosphere of distrust. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the fireplace with his notebook, watched as Hercule Poirot moved among the guests like a maestro conducting a silent orchestra, his every gesture calculated to elicit a reaction. Poirot had requested a moment to confirm.
The guests exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from confusion to wariness. Lady Evelyn Marwood, her hands folded tightly in her lap, spoke first. "The clock must be faulty, Monsieur Poirot. Those old mechanisms are unreliable." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of mild amusement. "Faulty, madame? Perhaps. But I examined the clock this morning. It was stopped not by a fault, but by a deliberate act. The mechanism was jammed. A small piece of paper, folded tightly, was lodged in the gears." He produced the paper, a tiny scrap no larger than a postage stamp, and held it up for all to see. The guests leaned forward, their curiosity piqued despite themselves. "This paper," Poirot continued, "bears a single word, written in ink. Truth. It is, I believe, a fragment of the same letter we found singed beside Dr. Carver's body. The killer. They wished to ensure the clock marked the moment of the crime, or perhaps to mislead us." Hastings, scribbling furiously, felt a thrill of excitement. "You mean the killer stopped the clock to throw off the timeline?" "Précisément, Hastings," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "But in their haste, they left this clue. The word truth, it echoes the singed letter's warning, or the truth will out. We are dealing with someone who plays a dangerous game, taunting us with their cleverness." Inspector Hargreaves, who had re-entered the room, snorted. "A bit of paper? That's no evidence. I've got men searching for that button, and we found something interesting in Mr. Marwood's room." He held up a waistcoat, its sleeve missing a pearl button. "Care to explain, Marwood?" Julian Marwood's face paled, but his voice remained defiant. "That's an old waistcoat. I haven't worn it in months. Someone could have taken the button, planted it even." "Planted?" Hargreaves scoffed. "You've got motive, opportunity, and now evidence. I'd say you're in a tight spot." Poirot raised a hand, his tone calm but commanding. "Inspector, a moment." "The button," said gently. "I do not accuse. I merely observe." "And you, Madame Langley?" Mrs. Langley's eyes narrowed. "I told you. I was in my room." If there's lipstick, it's not mine. Carver was a manipulative man. Perhaps he had a visitor you haven't considered. Poirot nodded, making a note. A visitor, oui. Let us explore this. Monsieur Drayton, you were in the billiard room with Monsieur Julian. But you stepped out briefly to fetch a drink, did you not? At what time? Drayton's florid face glistened with sweat. Yes, around 9:45. I went to the dining room for a glass of port. I was back in 5 minutes. And did you pass the library? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. No, Drayton said, too quickly. I mean, I might have walked by, but I didn't go in. Poirot's gaze shifted to Reginald Holt, the solicitor, who had been silent throughout the exchange. And you, Monsieur Holt? You were absent from the drawing room for several minutes. You claim it was to adjust your tie, but perhaps you too passed the library. Holt cleared his throat, his dour expression unwavering. I've said all I intend to. I was in my room, and that's that. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's questions settling over the guests like a fog. Hastings, watching closely, noticed the subtle shifts in their postures. Clara's trembling hands, Julian's forced nonchalance, Drayton's nervous fidgeting. Each seemed to guard a secret. But which held the key to the murder? Poirot closed his notebook with a soft snap. Mes amis, the truth is like a mosaic, built of many small pieces. The clock, the button, the lipstick, the letter. They are all pieces, and together they will form a picture. But we must be patient. Inspector, may I suggest a search for the lipstick itself? It may be in a lady's room, or discarded elsewhere. Hargreaves grunted, clearly annoyed but unable to dismiss Poirot's logic. Fine, we'll look for it. But I'm keeping an eye on you, Marwood. As the inspector and
Scuff mark near the servants' passage. A shoe, perhaps, caught on the rug. It is small, delicate, possibly a woman's. Clara or Mrs. Langley? Hastings ventured. Or another, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. We must not assume. But this mark, it confirms the passage was used. The boat was re-engaged after the killer fled. As the wind howled outside, rattling the manor's windows, Hastings felt the mystery deepen. The clues were mounting, but so were the questions. Poirot rose, his expression resolute. We are close, Hastings, to a crack in the facade. One more push, and the truth will begin to emerge. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The afternoon at Blackthorn Manor hung heavy with an oppressive stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the ancient house settling under the weight of its secrets. The guests, confined to the drawing-room under Inspector Hargreaves' watchful eye, exchanged guarded glances, their earlier attempts at civility fraying like an old tapestry. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the tall windows overlooking the mist-shrouded gardens, felt the tension coil tighter with each passing hour. Hercule Poirot, however, remained an island of calm, his small, neat figure seated at a writing desk, his notebook open as he reviewed his meticulous notes. The search for the pearl button and the mysterious lipstick had yielded little thus far. Inspector Hargreaves' men had combed the guests' rooms, finding only Julian Marwood's waistcoat with its missing button, a discovery that had cemented the inspector's suspicion of the young man. Poirot, however, had dismissed the waistcoat as too obvious, too clumsy, and turned his attention to subtler threads. The stopped clock, the singed letter, the scuff mark by the servant's passage, these were the pieces of his puzzle, and he was determined to fit them together. As the clock struck 3, Poirot rose, his green eyes bright with purpose. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority, the time has come to probe deeper. The lies, They multiply like shadows, but Hercule Poirot sees through the darkness. I wish to speak of Dr. Carver's
Secrets. Ask Mr. Drayton. He and Carver were thick as thieves in London. Victor Drayton's florid face reddened further, his hands fumbling with his handkerchief. "That's a lie," he sputtered. "I had business dealings with Carver, yes, but nothing untoward. He was advising me on investments, nothing more." Poirot's gaze sharpened. Investments, Monsieur Drayton? Or perhaps a venture that went awry? Grayson, the butler, overheard you arguing with Dr. Carver about a failed venture in the garden. And the singed letter, it spoke of a debt. Were you in debt to Dr. Carver? Drayton's eyes darted to the floor. "It was a misunderstanding," he muttered. "A business deal that didn't pan out. Carver was demanding compensation. But I didn't kill him." "Compensation?" Poirot echoed, making a note. "Or perhaps blackmail? Tell me, what did he know about you that made you so compliant?" Before Drayton could respond, Clara Vance let out a stifled sob, her delicate frame trembling. "Please, stop," she cried, her voice breaking. "You're tearing us apart. Dr. Carver was cruel. He said things about me, about my family, but I didn't do anything." Julian Marwood, seated beside her, placed a protective hand on her arm. "Leave her alone, Poirot," he said, his tone sharp. "She's been through enough." Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying the pair. "Monsieur Julian, your concern for Mademoiselle Vance is touching. But I wonder, does it stem from affection or from fear of what she might reveal?" Julian's smirk faltered, and for a moment his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, lighting a cigarette with a shaking hand. Hastings, watching from his vantage point, noted the exchange in his notebook. Clara's distress seemed genuine, but Julian's protectiveness struck him as calculated. He glanced at Poirot, who was now pacing slowly before the fireplace, his fingers steepled. "Let us consider another secret," Poirot said, turning to Reginald Holt, the solicitor, whose dour expression had not wavered. "Monsieur Holt, you were Sir Henry Marwood's trusted adviser. Contain, perhaps, something Dr. Carver wished to expose." The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words pressing down on the guests. Hastings felt a chill, as if the manor's walls themselves were listening. The lies were surfacing, each revelation peeling back a layer of deception, but the truth remained elusive. Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn, his tone softening. "Madame, you invited Dr. Carver to Blackthorn Manor. Why? If his presence caused such discord, what was your purpose?" Lady Evelyn's gaze faltered, her fingers tightening on her shawl. I needed his expertise," she said. "The estate is in disarray since Henry's death. There are debts, complications. Carver offered solutions." "Solutions," Poirot murmured. "Or threats? The singed letter suggests he held a secret over someone here. Was it you, madame?" Lady Evelyn's eyes widened, but before she could respond, a commotion at the door interrupted. Grayson, the butler, entered, his face ashen. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Hargreaves has found something in Miss Vance's room." "You'd better come." The guests gasped, and Clara's face drained of color. Poirot nodded, gesturing for Hastings to follow. "Lead on, Grayson," he said calmly. "Let us see what new thread has been woven into our tapestry." In Clara's small, neatly appointed room, Hargreaves stood triumphantly beside a dressing table, holding a small silver case. "Lipstick," he declared, opening it to reveal a subtle shade of rose. "Matches the smudge on the brandy glass, I'd wager. What do you say to that, Miss Vance?" Clara swayed, clutching the bedpost. "It's not mine," she whispered. "I swear I never used it." "Then how'd it get here?" Hargreaves demanded, his voice booming. Poirot stepped forward,
examining the case with his magnifying glass. "Inspector, a moment. The case is new, unblemished, yet the lipstick is worn down. Curious, no? As if it were placed here to be found." Hargreaves scoffed. "You're saying it's another plant? First the button, now this? You're making this more complicated than it is," Poirot
Waned. The grey light filtering through the windows, casting long, wavering shadows across the drawing room. The guests, their nerves frayed by the relentless probing of Hercule Poirot and the blustering accusations of Inspector Hargreaves, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the fireplace, felt the weight of the investigation pressing down on him, each new clue a twist in the labyrinth of Dr. Leonard Carver's murder. Poirot, seated at the center of the room, his notebook open and his pencil poised, radiated an air of calm authority. The discovery of the lipstick in Clara Vance's room had sent ripples of suspicion through the group, and Hargreaves, convinced of her guilt, was ready to make an arrest. Poirot, however, had urged caution, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty that the truth was still obscured by a veil of deception. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the heavy silence, "we have uncovered many threads in this tapestry of murder. The stopped clock, the pearl button, the singed letter, the lipstick on the brandy glass. But these are mere objects. The true key lies in the hearts of those present, in the emotions that drive us to act against reason. I sense that one among you is close to breaking, and I ask, nay, I implore you to speak now, before the net of justice closes." The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from one to another. Lady Evelyn Marwood, her hands clasped tightly, looked as if she might speak. But it was Clara Vance who broke the silence. The young woman, her delicate frame trembling, rose from her chair, her face pale as moonlight. "I can't bear it any longer," she cried, her voice a mixture of anguish and desperation. "You're all staring at me, thinking I did it. That lipstick, it's not mine, I swear. But Dr. Carver, he knew something about me, something I've kept hidden for years." Her eyes filled with tears, and she sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. The room erupted in murmurs, and Julian Marwood, seated beside her, gripped her.
Hargreaves, standing by the door, snorted. "That's a motive if I ever heard one. Blackmail's a nasty business, and you had reason to want him dead." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the inspector. "A moment, Inspector. Mademoiselle Vance, you say you were in the drawing-room with Lady Marwood and Monsieur Holt at 10 o'clock. Yet you left to fetch a shawl. Did you see Dr. Carver then?" "No," Clara said, her eyes wide. "I swear I went straight to my room and back. I didn't go near the library." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the lipstick in your room? How did it come to be there?" "I don't know," Clara sobbed. "Someone must have put it there. I don't even use that shade." The room fell silent, the weight of Clara's confession hanging like a storm cloud. Hastings, watching closely, noted the reactions of the others. Lady Evelyn's face was a mask of sympathy, but her hands trembled. Julian's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on Clara, as if willing her to stop speaking. Mrs. Beatrice Langley's lips were pursed, her disapproval palpable. Victor Drayton mopped his brow, his unease almost comical, while Reginald Holt sat rigidly, his dour expression unchanged. Poirot turned to Lady Evelyn, his tone gentle but probing. "Madame, you employed Mademoiselle Vance. Did you know of her past?" Lady Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening on her shawl. "I suspected she had reasons for her reticence, but I never pried. Clara has been a loyal companion. I trusted her. Trusted, oui, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But trust, it can blind us to the truth. Monsieur Drayton, you too were blackmailed by Dr. Carver, were you not? The failed venture, it was not merely a business loss, but something more compromising. Drayton's face flushed crimson. I've told you it was just business. Carver was a shark, always pushing for more, but I didn't kill him. And yet, Poirot said, his voice soft but relentless, you were seen near the east wing at 9:45, fetching a drink. The library is but a few steps of deception. Hastings, his notebook filled with contradictions, felt the mystery tightening like a noose. Poirot closed his notebook with a soft snap, his eyes sweeping the room. Mes amis, he said, the truth is close, but it is buried beneath lies. Mademoiselle Vance's confession is a crack in the facade, but it is not the whole story. Someone in this room knows more, perhaps the owner of the pearl button, or the one who left the lipstick. I urge you to speak, for silence will not protect you. As the guests dispersed, their whispers trailing like smoke, Hastings leaned close to Poirot. Clara's story, it's heartbreaking. But do you believe her? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. She speaks truth, Hastings, but not all of it. Her confession is a turning point, oui, but it is also a distraction. The killer is watching, calculating. We must be ready for their next move. The manor's shadows deepened as the day faded, each secret a step closer to the truth, each lie a thread in the killer's carefully woven web. Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening at Blackthorn Manor descended with a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the house, the wind rattling the windows as if impatient for the truth to emerge. The drawing room, where the guests had gathered once more, was a cauldron of suppressed emotions, the air thick with suspicion and dread. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the heavy velvet curtains, felt his pulse quicken as Hercule Poirot prepared to tighten the net around Dr. Leonard Carver's killer. The little Belgian detective, his suit immaculate and his mustache perfectly waxed, stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. Poirot had spent the afternoon in quiet consultation with Hastings, reviewing the clues, the stopped clock at 9:58, the pearl button, the singed letter with its cryptic warning, the lipstick smudge on the brandy glass, and the fresh scratches on the servant's passage bolt. Clara Vance's emotional confession had cracked the facade of the guest's composure, but Poirot was certain the killer was still hiding, weaving a web of lies to deflect suspicion. Now, he intended to apply psychological,
Clutched a handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Mrs. Beatrice Langley sat rigid, her lips a thin line, while Victor Drayton mopped his brow with a trembling hand. Reginald Holt, the solicitor, cleared his throat, his dour expression betraying a flicker of unease. Poirot paced slowly before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us reconstruct the night of the murder," he said. At 9:45 the household was scattered. Lady Marwood, Mademoiselle Vance, and Monsieur Holt were in the drawing-room, though Monsieur Holt left briefly to fetch a cigar. Madame Langley was in her room, or so she claims, yet was seen near the east wing. Monsieur Julien and Monsieur Drayton were in the billiard room, though Monsieur Drayton stepped out for a drink. At 10 o'clock, a scream was heard, and Dr. Carver was found dead, a letter opener in his heart. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But the clock in the library, it stopped at 9:58. Why? To fix the time of death, perhaps, or to mislead us. The singed letter spoke of a debt and a truth. The pearl button suggests a struggle. The lipstick smudge on the brandy glass points to a woman, or someone who wishes us to think so. And the servants' passage, its bolt scratched, tells us the killer escaped that way. Inspector Hargreaves, standing by the door, snorted. "You're spinning a fine tale, Poirot, but we've got evidence." The button from Marwood's waistcoat, the lipstick in Miss Vance's room, those point to them. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Evidence, oui. But evidence can be planted, Inspector. The waistcoat is too convenient. The lipstick, too obvious. No. The killer is cleverer than that. They have orchestrated this crime to point fingers at others, but they have made mistakes. And tonight, I shall exploit those mistakes. He turned to the guests, his voice softening but laced with steel. I propose a test. Each of you will write a statement of your movements from 9 to 10 o'clock last night. You will do so privately, in the study, and seal your—
Was neat, almost mechanical, but his eyes darted to the door. When the envelopes were collected, Poirot gathered the guests back in the drawing room. He held the stack of envelopes, his expression grave. Now, mes amis, I shall reveal the new clue. In the library, hidden beneath the rug near the servants' passage, I found a single thread of silk, blue in color. It matches the shawl worn by one of you last night. Who will claim it? The room fell silent, the guest's eyes wide with fear. Lady Evelyn's hand strayed to her shawl, a deep blue silk, but she quickly withdrew it. Clara gasped. Her own shawl, a pale gray, clutched tightly. Mrs. Langley's shawl was black, but her fingers twitched as if tempted to check it. Poirot's gaze swept the room. No one claims it? Very well. I shall open the statements and compare them to the evidence. But know this, the thread, the lipstick, the button, they are all part of a pattern, and the pattern points to one person. As he began to open the first envelope, Clara Vance let out a cry, leaping to her feet. Stop! I can't stand it. I was in the library, I admit it, but I didn't kill him. I went to plead with him, to beg him to keep my secret. He was alive when I left. The room erupted, Hargreaves stepping forward with a triumphant glare. There it is, a confession. Non, Poirot said sharply, his voice cutting through the chaos. Not a confession of murder, Inspector, but of presence. Mademoiselle Vance, what time did you visit Dr. Carver? Clara sobbed, her words tumbling out. Just before 10. I left at 9:55, I swear. He was alive, sitting at the desk, drinking his brandy. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the lipstick smudge, was it yours? No, Clara insisted. I don't wear that shade. Someone must have used my case to frame me. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. Inspector, do not act yet. There is more to uncover. As Clara sank back into her chair, Julian's arm around her, Hastings felt the trap closing. Poirot's gambit had worked, forcing Clara to reveal her presence in the library, but the killer remained elusive.
Fear. The evening had deepened into night, and the flickering firelight cast long shadows that danced across the faces of the gathered guests. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the tall windows, felt his heart pound as Hercule Poirot prepared to unveil the truth behind Dr. Leonard Carver's murder. The little Belgian detective, his suit as impeccable as ever, stood before the fireplace, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had solved the puzzle. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady and resonant. We have reached the moment of truth. A man lies dead, struck down in the library, and the clues, the stocked clock, the pearl button, the singed letter, the lipstick smudge, the blue silk thread, have led us through a maze of deception. But Hercule Poirot's little grey cells have unraveled the knots. And now, I shall reveal the killer. The guests sat rigid, their eyes fixed on Poirot. Lady Evelyn Marwood's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Julian Marwood, his cigarette unlit, stared with a mixture of defiance and dread. Clara Vance, still shaken from her confession, clutched her handkerchief, her face pale. Mrs. Beatrice Langley's lips were a thin line, her gaze sharp. Victor Drayton mopped his brow, his hands trembling, while Reginald Holt's dour expression betrayed a flicker of unease. Inspector Hargreaves, standing by the door, folded his arms, his skepticism palpable. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us begin with the crime. Dr. Carver was killed at precisely 10 o'clock, as the scream attests. The library clock, stopped at 9:58, was a deliberate act to mislead us, but it tells us the killer was precise, calculating. The letter opener, bearing the Marwood crest, was a weapon of opportunity, taken from the desk. The pearl button, the lipstick smudge, the singed letter, the blue silk thread, all were left to point us toward false culprits. But the servants' passage, its bolt scratched, reveals the killer's escape. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Mademoiselle Vance, you confessed to visiting Dr. Carver at 9:55.
Cast suspicion on her. Hargreaves snorted. You're saying it's all a setup? Then who's the killer, Poirot? Poirot's smile was faint but confident. Patience, Inspector. The singed letter, with its warning of a debt and a truth, points to blackmail. Dr. Carver was a man who collected secrets, using them to extort money or favors. Each of you had reason to fear him. But the blue silk thread, found near the servants' passage, is the key. It matches the shawl worn by one person here, Madame Langley. Mrs. Langley gasped, her face reddening. How dare you? My shawl is black, not blue. No, madame, Poirot said, producing a small swatch of blue silk from his pocket. This was found in your room, hidden in a drawer. You wore a blue silk shawl last night, seen by Grayson as you passed the east wing at 9:30. You claimed to be fetching it, but you were in the library, were you not? Mrs. Langley's eyes widened, her composure cracking. I was cold. I fetched my shawl, nothing more. Poirot's voice grew softer, more relentless. You were cold, oui, but also desperate. Dr. Carver held a secret over you, one you could not bear to have exposed. You visited him in the library, perhaps to plead, perhaps to pay. But he refused to relent. In a moment of rage, you seized the letter opener and struck him down. No, Mrs. Langley cried, leaping to her feet. I didn't kill him. I admit I went to the library. He was demanding money I didn't have. He knew about my husband's debts, how I'd falsified documents to keep this estate in the family. But I left him alive. Poirot's gaze was unyielding. You left, oui, but not before stopping the clock at 9:58, jamming it with a paper bearing the word truth. A taunt, perhaps, or a confession. You fled through the servants' passage, rebolting it to create the illusion of a locked room. But you left the blue silk thread, torn from your shawl in your haste. Mrs. Langley swayed, her hands clutching the table. No, it wasn't me.
Truth is complete only when all is clear. You struck Dr. Carver at 9:58, stopped the clock, and fled. The scream at 10 was not from Carver, but from Mademoiselle Vance, returning to the library and finding his body. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. I went back to give him the money he demanded. I saw him, dead, and screamed. Poirot nodded. The pieces fit. The killer's plan was clever, but not clever enough to escape Hercule Poirot. As Hargreaves led Mrs. Langley away, the guests sat in stunned silence. Lady Evelyn's face was ashen, Julian's jaw slack. Drayton and Holt exchanged uneasy glances, their secrets safe for now. Hastings, his notebook forgotten, marveled at Poirot's precision. Mon ami, Poirot said softly, turning to Hastings. The truth is a delicate thing, but it cannot hide from the little gray cells. The manor's shadows seemed to lift, if only slightly, as the truth was laid bare. The killer caught in Poirot's meticulously set trap. The drawing-room of Blackthorn Manor, so recently a stage for accusations and revelations, now lay quiet, the fire in the hearth reduced to glowing embers. The guests, their faces drawn with the exhaustion of truth unveiled, had dispersed to their rooms under the watchful eye of Inspector Hargreaves' constables. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her confession still echoing in the air, had been taken to the village of Thornby to await formal charges. The manor, though freed from the shadow of an unsolved murder, seemed to sag under the weight of its own secrets, as if reluctant to let go of the drama that had unfolded within its walls. Captain Arthur Hastings sat in an armchair by the window, his notebook closed, his mind replaying the events of the evening. Hercule Poirot, his small figure silhouetted against the firelight, stood by the mantelpiece, his hands clasped behind his back. The little Belgian detective's mustache was as impeccable as ever, but his green eyes held a contemplative depth, a sign that his work was not yet complete.
Quiet satisfaction. Solid, Hastings? No. It was fragile as glass. Madame Langley's alibi, writing letters in her room, was unverified, and her presence near the East Wing at 9:30, seen by Grayson, placed her too close to the library. The blue silk thread. It was the key. When I found it beneath the rug, I suspected a shawl, and only Madame Langley's matched. Her attempt to burn the letter, to plant the button and lipstick, these were the acts of a desperate woman, not a clever one. He paced slowly, his voice soft but resonant. The human mind, Hastings, it seeks to hide its guilt, but it cannot resist leaving a trace. Madame Langley wished to protect her reputation, her claim to the Marwood estate. Dr. Carver's blackmail threatened to expose her forgery, her falsified documents. In a moment of panic she struck, thinking she could outwit us all. But the little gray cells, they see what others miss. Hastings nodded, his admiration for Poirot undimmed. And the clock, stopping it at 9:58, with that paper saying truth. Why do you think she did that? Poirot's expression grew somber. The word truth, it was her taunt, her defiance. She believed she could control the narrative, make us doubt the timeline. But the scream at 10 from Mademoiselle Vance betrayed her. The clock was a mistake, Hastings, a flourish too far. It told me the killer was in the library before 10, and only Madame Langley's movements fit. He paused, gazing into the dying fire. Murder, it is not merely a crime of the body, but of the soul. Madame Langley killed to protect her pride, her place in this family, but in doing so she lost everything. It is a tragedy, oui, but one of her own making. Hastings shifted in his chair, the weight of Poirot's words settling over him. What about the others? Clara, Julian, Drayton? They all had secrets. Will they face consequences? Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of mild amusement. Secrets, mon ami, are the currency of such gatherings. Mademoiselle Vance's past. It is painful, but not criminal. Monsieur Julian's debts, they are a matter for...
Was a small, intimate room, its walls lined with maps and ledgers, a reminder of the Marwood family's tangled affairs. Lady Evelyn stood by the desk, her grey dress blending with the shadows. Her face, though composed, bore the lines of a woman who had seen too much sorrow. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low, I owe you my gratitude. You've saved this house from further scandal. But I must ask, did I bring this upon us? Inviting Dr. Carver, knowing his reputation. Was I to blame? Poirot's expression softened. Madame, you sought to protect your estate, your legacy. Dr. Carver's death was not your doing, but the result of one woman's desperation. You must not carry her guilt. Lady Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she nodded. Thank you. I shall try to rebuild what remains of this family. As they left the study, Poirot and Hastings made their way to the hall, where their coats awaited. The manor seemed quieter now, its secrets laid bare. Outside, the wind had stilled, and the stars pierced the night sky like pinpricks of clarity. Hastings, Poirot said as they stepped onto the gravel drive, life is a mystery, no less than murder. We solve one puzzle only to find another. But for now, we have restored order, and that is enough. As their car pulled away from Blackthorn Manor, Hastings glanced back at the looming silhouette of the house, its windows dark. Poirot, beside him, closed his eyes, his mind already turning to the next challenge, his little grey cells ever restless. Chapter 12. The Unseen Motive. The morning following Mrs. Beatrice Langley's confession broke over Blackthorn Manor with a tentative brightness, as if the sun itself were reluctant to illuminate the lingering shadows of the previous night's drama. The guests, though freed from the immediate threat of suspicion, moved through the breakfast room with a subdued air, their conversations muted, and their glances cautious. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at the long mahogany table, sipped his coffee, his mind still reeling from the precision of gleaming with fresh wax. His green eyes, however, held a spark of unrest, as if his morning walk had stirred new questions rather than settled old ones. He declined breakfast, opting instead for a cup of tisane, and took a seat beside Hastings. Mon ami, Poirot said softly, his voice barely audible over the clink of cutlery. You are troubled, oui? You sense, as I do, that the truth we have uncovered is but the surface of a deeper lake. Hastings nodded, lowering his voice. Mrs. Langley's confession. It fits the evidence, but it feels too tidy. The way she broke so quickly, the planted button and lipstick. Could someone else have manipulated her into acting? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Précisément, Hastings. You begin to think like Hercule Poirot. The confession, it is convincing, but it leaves questions unanswered. Why, for example, was the letter only partially burned? Why leave the word truth in the clock? These are not the acts of a panicked killer, but of one who wishes to control the narrative, to direct our gaze. Before Hastings could respond, Lady Evelyn Marwood approached, her face pale but composed. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low, I must speak with you privately. There is something I should have told you sooner. Poirot's eyes sharpened, and he gestured toward the study. Of course, madame. Let us retire to a place of quiet. The study, with its maps and ledgers, felt like a sanctuary from the manor's oppressive atmosphere. Lady Evelyn closed the door behind them, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her shawl. A gray one, Hastings noted, not the blue silk of the previous night. Monsieur Poirot, she began, her voice unsteady. I fear I have misled you, though not intentionally. Beatrice, Mrs. Langley, she was not acting alone. I believe someone else in this house knew of her plans, perhaps even encouraged her. Poirot's eyebrows rose, his interest piqued. Encouraged, madame? This is a grave accusation. Who do you suspect? Lady Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. I cannot be certain, but... Poirot, however, remained calm, his gaze fixed on Lady Evelyn. Madame, he said,
This is most illuminating. But we must have proof. Tell me, did you see or hear anything else that night? Near a system, the library perhaps, that might confirm this connection?
Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered with uncertainty.
I heard voices in the East Wing corridor, just before 10. I couldn't make out the words, but one was a man's, low, urgent. I thought it might be Victor, but I wasn't sure. I was in the drawing room, preparing to retire, and didn't investigate.
Poirot nodded, making a mental note.
Merci, madame. Your candor may yet bring clarity. Please, say nothing of this to the others. We must proceed with care.
As Lady Evelyn left, her steps heavy with the burden of her revelation, Hastings turned to Poirot.
Do you think Drayton was involved?
Could he have orchestrated the murder, using Mrs. Langley as a pawn? Poirot's gaze was distant, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk.
It is possible, Hastings.
Monsieur Drayton's nervousness, his vague alibis, his argument with Carver over a failed venture, these suggest a man with much to hide. But we must consider the mechanics of the crime. The servant's passage, the planted evidence, these required a single hand, or so it seems. Yet a second player, guiding from the shadows, is not impossible. He rose, moving to the window to gaze at the gardens below.
The motive, Hastings, is what eludes us.
Mrs. Langley killed to protect her forgery, but what drove Drayton? Was it also blackmail, or something deeper, a shared secret, perhaps, that bound him to Madame Langley? Hastings frowned, flipping through his notes. The singed letter mentioned a debt. Could Drayton have owed Carver money, or something else?
Précisément,
Poirot said, turning back to him. The letter was not merely a threat to Madame Langley. The phrase, "the truth will out," suggests a broader secret, one that threatened more than one person. We must re-examine Drayton's movements, his interactions with Madame Langley.
He was speaking to someone, low, like he didn't want to be overheard. I couldn't see who. Poirot nodded, dismissing Grayson with a wave. Merci. You have confirmed much. As the butler retreated, Hastings leaned close. Poirot, if Drayton was there, he could have entered the library after Clara left, before Mrs. Langley struck. Or could he have been with her? Possible, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice low, but we must be precise. The scream at 10 was Mademoiselle Vance's, finding the body. Madame Langley struck at 9:58, as the clock tells us. Drayton's presence in the corridor suggests he knew of the plan or was part of it. We must confront him. They returned to the drawing room, where Victor Drayton sat alone, nursing a glass of brandy. His florid face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot. Poirot wasted no time. Monsieur Drayton, he said, his voice sharp. You were seen near the library at 9:55, speaking in hushed tones. With whom? And why? Drayton's glass slipped, spilling brandy on the table. I was just passing through. I didn't go in. No, Poirot said, stepping closer. You were conspiring with Madame Langley, were you not? You knew of her plan to silence Dr. Carver, perhaps even encouraged it. What was your motive, monsieur? What secret did Carver hold over you? Drayton's face crumpled, his hands shaking. It wasn't like that. Carver was bleeding me dry. Debts from a failed investment, yes, but also, he knew about my dealings with Sir Henry. We diverted funds from the estate years ago. Beatrice knew too. She helped cover it up. Carver was going to expose us both. Poirot's eyes narrowed. So you planned together, oui? You ensured Madame Langley acted, while you remained in the shadows. No, Drayton cried. I didn't tell her to kill him. I told her we had to stop him. She said she'd handle it. I didn't know she'd go that far. The room seemed to hold its breath. Drayton's confession, a second crack in the case's facade. Hastings scribbled furiously, "Cloud over the remaining occupants." Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the tall windows, felt the weight of the investigation shift once more. The revelation of Drayton's involvement adding a new layer to the intricate puzzle. Hercule Poirot, his small figure poised with unwavering confidence, stood before the fireplace, his green eyes scanning the room as if searching for a final, elusive thread. Mrs. Beatrice Langley's arrest had seemed to close the case, her confession tying neatly to the physical evidence, the blue silk thread, the stopped clock, the planted button and lipstick. Yet Drayton's admission that he had encouraged her, driven by his own fear of Carver's blackmail, suggested a deeper conspiracy. Poirot, ever meticulous, was not content to let the matter rest. "There is more, mon ami," he had murmured to Hastings earlier. "A hidden correspondence that binds these two guilty souls. We must find it." Now, addressing the assembled guests, Lady Evelyn Marwood, Julian Marwood, Clara Vance, and Reginald Holt, Poirot's voice carried a quiet intensity. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the truth of Dr. Carver's murder has been partially revealed. Madame Langley struck the fatal blow, driven by fear of exposure. Monsieur Drayton, her accomplice in spirit, urged her to act, his own secrets at stake. But there is one final piece, a correspondence, a written exchange that confirms their collusion. I believe it lies hidden within this manor." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Lady Evelyn's hands tightened on her shawl, her face pale but composed. Julian, his usual nonchalance replaced by a wary alertness, lit a cigarette with unsteady fingers. Clara, her eyes red from crying, clutched her handkerchief, while Holt's dour expression betrayed a flicker of curiosity. Inspector Hargreaves, standing by the door, scoffed. "More theories, Poirot? We've got a confession and a motive. What's this about letters? You're chasing ghosts now." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of suppressed amusement. "Ghosts, Inspector? No, I chased the truth." The singed, rigid demeanor, a narrow bed, a writing desk, a wardrobe of somber dresses. Poirot moved with methodical care, his gloved hands examining every surface. Hastings, following his lead, checked the wardrobe, finding nothing but neatly folded garments. It was Poirot who discovered the hidden compartment. Behind a small mirror on the writing desk, a panel slid open to reveal a bundle of letters, tied with a black ribbon. "Voilà," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The correspondence we seek." The letters, written in Mrs. Langley's precise hand and Drayton's scrawling script, were a damning chronicle of their conspiracy. One, dated 2 days before Carver's arrival, read, "Victor, we cannot allow Carver to expose us. The forged documents, your diverted funds, they would ruin us both. We must act decisively." Drayton's reply was equally incriminating. "Beatrice, I'll keep him occupied in the garden. You must find a way to silence him. The estate depends on it." Hastings, reading over Poirot's shoulder, felt a chill. They planned it together, but Langley took the final step. "Drayton's just as guilty, isn't he?" "Oui, Hastings," Poirot said, carefully folding the letters. He did not wield the weapon, but he set the stage. His fear, his greed, they were the spark that ignited Madame Langley's desperation. They returned to the drawing room, where Hargreaves and the guests awaited. Poirot held up the bundle of letters, his voice steady. "Mes amis, the truth is complete. These letters, hidden in Madame Langley's room, confirmed that she and Monsieur Drayton conspired to stop Dr. Carver's blackmail. Madame Langley struck the blow, but Monsieur Drayton's encouragement was the catalyst. Together, they sought to protect their secrets, forged documents, diverted funds, at the cost of a man's life. Drayton, his face ashen, leapt to his feet. "I didn't tell her to kill him. I only wanted him silenced, bought off perhaps. I didn't know she'd go so far." Hargreaves stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. "That's for a jury to decide, Drayton.
Your gray cells. They see what the heart conceals." The manners seemed to exhale, its oppressive weight lifting slightly, as the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Yet Hastings knew that Poirot's work was never truly done, for each mystery uncovered new truths about the human soul. Chapter 14. The Final Threads. 1. The dusk that settled over Blackthorn Manor carried a melancholy weight, as if the house itself mourned the unraveling of its secrets. The drawing-room, now sparsely populated with only Lady Evelyn Marwood, Julian Marwood, Clara Vance, and Reginald Holt remaining, felt cavernous in its silence. The fire had dwindled to a faint glow, casting flickering shadows that seemed to whisper of the events that had transpired. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the window, watched the last light fade over the Dorset hills, his notebook resting on his lap, its pages filled with the intricate details of Dr. Leonard Carver's murder. Hercule Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, his small figure radiating a quiet authority, his green eyes reflecting the fire's embers. The discovery of the hidden correspondence between Mrs. Beatrice Langley and Victor Drayton had sealed their guilt, confirming their conspiracy to silence Carver's blackmail. Mrs. Langley's confession and Drayton's complicity had tied the case with a neat bow, yet Poirot's demeanor suggested a lingering unease, a sense that some final threads remained untied. "Mon ami," Poirot said, turning to Hastings, his voice low, "you have observed the resolution of this tragedy, but you sense, as I do, that the tapestry is not yet complete. There are threads, small, subtle threads, that must be woven into the whole before we depart." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowed. "You mean the other secrets? Clara's past, Julian's debts, Holt's role in the estate. They weren't involved in the murder, but they're all hiding something." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his mustache twitching. "Each secret, it is a thread in the fabric of this house. To leave them dangling would be to leave the truth incomplete. Let us gather the remaining players and tie these threads." He rang the bell for Grayson, the butler, who appeared promptly, his face still pale from the ordeal. "Solved."
Madame Langley and Monsieur Drayton, driven by fear of exposure, conspired to end his blackmail. But this house holds other secrets, and it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to ensure all is laid bare. Let us speak plainly. He turned to Clara Vance, his tone gentle. "Mademoiselle, your secret, your father's disgrace, was known to Dr. Carver. You feared his threats, but you did not kill. Tell me, have you other burdens to share?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she straightened, her voice steadier than before. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I told you everything. My father's shame was my only secret, and now it's known. I want to move forward, to serve Lady Evelyn honestly." Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. "Bon, your honesty does you credit. And you, Monsieur Julian?" Julian's smirk was faint, his fingers toying with his cigarette. "You've got me pegged, Poirot. Debts, yes, too many nights at the card table. Carver knew, threatened to tell Aunt Evelyn, but I didn't kill him. I'm not that desperate." Yet, Lady Evelyn's face tightened, but she spoke softly. "Julian, why didn't you tell me? We could have found a way." Julian shrugged, his nonchalance a thin mask. "Pride, I suppose. Didn't want to be the family failure." Poirot's eyes moved to Reginald Holt,
who stood rigidly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Monsieur Holt, you have been silent, guarding the secrets of the Marwood estate. Dr. Carver's involvement threatened your authority, oui? Did you know of Madame Langley's forgery?" Holt cleared his throat, his voice low. "I suspected irregularities in the estate's accounts, but I had no proof. Carver's meddling was inconvenient, but I had no reason to wish him dead. My duty is to Lady Marwood, to protect her interests." Poirot's gaze lingered, probing. "And yet, you were near the library at 9:45, retrieving documents. Were these documents related to the forgery?" Holt's jaw tightened. "They were estate records, nothing more. I was verifying figures for Lady Marwood." Poirot nodded, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt.
Absorbed his words. Grayson entered, announcing that the car for Poirot and Hastings was ready. The manor seemed to exhale, its oppressive air lifting as the final truths were spoken. Hastings, gathering his notebook, felt a sense of closure, though the weight of the case lingered. "Poirot," he said as they moved to the hall, "you've done it again." "But Holt, do you think he's hiding more?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Monsieur Holt guards his secrets, oui, but they are not those of murder. His silence is his armor, and we need not pierce it further. For now, the case is closed." The hall's oak door swung open, revealing the cool night air. As they stepped onto the gravel drive, Hastings glanced back at Blackthorn Manor, its windows dark, but no longer menacing. Poirot beside him adjusted his hat, his mind already turning to new horizons, his little grey cells ever vigilant. The departure. The final morning at Blackthorn Manor dawned with a fragile clarity. The mist that had clung to the Dorset hills lifting to reveal a sky of pale blue. The ancient house, its stones weathered by centuries of secrets, stood silent, as if exhausted by the truths that had been wrenched from its shadows. The guests, Lady Evelyn Marwood, Julian Marwood, Clara Vance and Reginald Holt, gathered in the hall, their faces marked by a mixture of relief and weariness. The arrest of Mrs. Beatrice Langley and Victor Drayton had brought closure to Dr. Leonard Carver's murder. Yet the scars of the ordeal lingered, etched into the manor's very walls. Captain Arthur Hastings stood by the grand staircase, his suitcase packed and his notebook tucked safely in his coat pocket. The case had been a triumph for Hercule Poirot, his little grey cells unraveling a web of blackmail, forgery, and conspiracy with surgical precision. Yet Hastings, ever attuned to his friend's moods, sensed a quiet melancholy in Poirot as he prepared to leave. The little Belgian detective, his suit immaculate and his moustache perfectly waxed, stood by the oak door, his green eyes surveying the hall with a contemplative air. Mon ami,
though pale, held a quiet resolve. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady. "I cannot thank you enough. You've saved this family from ruin, though the cost has been great. I hope we can rebuild." Poirot inclined his head, his expression gentle. "Madame, the wounds of truth are painful, but they heal. You have strength, and with it, you will restore this house. But heed this, guard against secrets, for they are the seeds of such tragedies." Lady Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "I will, and I'll ensure Clara and Julian have the support they need. As for Mr. Holt, he has agreed to oversee the estate's accounts with full transparency." Holt, standing nearby, cleared his throat, his dour demeanour softened by a flicker of gratitude. "I'll do my duty, Monsieur Poirot. The Marwood estate will be managed properly henceforth." Julian Marwood, leaning against a pillar, offered a wry smile. "I suppose I'll have to cut back on the cards, eh?" "Thanks, Poirot. You've given us a chance to start fresh." Clara Vance, her delicate frame less fragile than before, stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, I was so afraid my past would destroy me. But you've shown me that the truth, however painful, sets us free. I'll never forget." Poirot's eyes softened, and he bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle, your courage is your strength. Live honestly, and you will find peace." As the guests exchanged final words, Grayson, the butler, appeared with their coats, his face a mask of professional calm. "Your car is ready, gentlemen," he said, handing Poirot his hat. "Safe travels." The gravel drive crunched underfoot as Poirot and Hastings stepped outside, the cool air carrying the scent of damp earth and fading roses. The car, a sleek black Daimler, waited to take them to the station. As they settled into the back seat, Hastings glanced at Poirot, who was gazing at the Manor's receding silhouette. "Poirot," Hastings said, "do you ever wonder what happens to them after we leave? The Marwood
And Drayton. It was like watching a chess master. Poirot's smile was modest, but his eyes gleamed. Chess, oui, but with human hearts as pieces. Each move, each clue, reveals the player's mind. The killer's mistake was underestimating Hercule Poirot. As the train station came into view, the weight of Blackthorn Manor lifted, replaced by the anticipation of London's bustle. Hastings felt a pang of nostalgia for the case, its intensity a stark contrast to the routine that awaited. Poirot, sensing his mood, clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Courage, mon ami," he said. "There will always be another mystery, another puzzle for the little grey cells. For now, let us enjoy the journey home." The train's whistle sounded, a sharp note in the quiet morning, and as they boarded, Blackthorn Manor became a memory, its secrets laid bare, its story concluded, at least for Hercule Poirot,